Hello, and thank you for joining us today as we focus on housing. My name is Mark Sines, and I'll be your host today as we take a look at some of the various issues around affordable housing here in Johnson County. I'm joined today by Sally Scott, Chair of the Johnson County Affordable Homes Coalition, and by Steve Gordon, Vice President of AM Management and General Manager of the Saddlebrook Development. He's also a board member of the Housing Trust Fund of Johnson County. Thanks for both of you being here today.
Thank you.
It seems like we've been hearing a lot about affordable housing in the local news lately. I've seen reports recently about the lack of affordable housing that we have in the area. The various governments I know here in Johnson County have convened a working group to talk about the issue, and the City Council just accepted a recommendation from a task force about developing some affordable housing in one of the newly developed areas here in town. Is it my imagination, or is this topic something that is heating up?
Definitely it's heating up, and I think our coalition's been working on that, but I think it's also a reflection of the reality that Johnson County is the most expensive county in the state of Iowa for housing costs, if you count housing and utilities.
Absolutely.
And that's putting a lot of pressure on people, and I think local governments, I think especially Iowa City, City Council, and the Johnson County Board of Supervisors are really responding to this.
Excellent. Yes, I know. You mentioned the Affordable Homes Coalition, and all three of us are involved in that group, and it's a wonderful group, and I think it's been actively working with the various individual communities and some of the area developers to drive this affordable housing discussion. And obviously, do you feel this is being successful so far?
We do. We've been really active since October 2013, so in just 2 years, I think we've helped make the issue more visible and more urgent. I mean, the need was there. We know statistically affordable housing has been an issue, a problem for a decade or more. But by making it more visible and I think by collaborating with private sector, public sector, we've begun to see some progress.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but let's maybe talk about the phrase affordable housing for a minute. I think a lot of people see this as maybe just subsidized housing, government handouts, if you will, or they think of the old public housing complexes in Chicago and New York and stuff like that, where these massive developments. Is that what we're talking about here?
No, the old model of public housing, giant structures that we know have been knocked down in many cities were knocked down for a reason. They did not succeed. It turned out that concentrating poverty in that way was not a good idea. So really what affordable housing means is you are not paying, if you're a family, you're not paying more than 30% of your income on housing.
Oh, okay.
Because what we know is that if you pay more than 30%, then you start to fall short in other areas of your life, healthcare costs, education costs.
Sure.
So our coalition has really focused on lower income folks who are making less than the average income, having the opportunity for decent affordable housing at 30% or less of their income, spending that on housing.
Okay. So here in Johnson County, what are some of the numbers? How many people are challenged to find safe, affordable housing for themselves or their families? And who are we talking about that needs affordable housing?
So if we look at that 30% mark, if you're paying more than 30%, you got a problem, 20,000 households in Johnson County.
Wow.
Now, we know some of them are students, but definitely not all. And the numbers have gone up significantly since 2000 to 2010 without the number of students going up. So the problem is getting worse. And I think another stereotype, kind of like the large-scale public housing, is that folks who need affordable housing are folks who aren't working. But we all know that working people are facing really tough times these days if they're not earning high incomes. So the people who are really challenged are elderly, people with disabilities, but a lot of working individuals and working families. And they're people who do the jobs we all depend on, health aides, teaching aides, mechanics, people who work in restaurants. These folks are critical to our local economy.
And I think I've heard recently that the emergency shelters in town are seeing more families, which is something I don't think we often think about when we think of the need for affordable housing is that we're talking about, entire family units sometimes.
Oh, yeah,
That's-
yeah, and it's a huge burden for parents and children if they don't have a stable place to live.
Okay, well, thank you. Steve, let's talk about what affordable housing might look like from a developer or builder's perspective. I know a lot of local builders around here focus on building large, expensive homes, and homes that the average worker probably can't afford. I suspect they make a lot more money doing that. I know your company has been consistently building some of the lower cost housing units in the area. And what helps make a home more affordable? What does an affordable home look like?
Well, I think that the two main factors in keeping the cost down, which really that's what it boils down to, is,
Sure.
is at the end of the day, a home will be sold to a buyer or a family based on how much it costs to build and develop. And the two main factors in that are the density of the area that development is in, or the home you're building, and of course the size of the home. And
Density being how many homes you can get in a certain area.
Yeah, it's just it's a math problem really. At the end of the day, if it costs the same amount of money to put in 100 feet worth of street, but if you have 5 homes on that 100 feet versus 2, obviously your costs are going to be a lot less, and thus the price of the home will be a lot less and affordable to more people and more families. So those are the two main factors, and what drive the price of a home. There's a lot of costs that go into it, and those continually go up every year.
Sure.
Cost of land in the area, the cost of the goods and services, the subcontractors that are building the house, the cost to put in the streets, and then regulation costs is a big thing people always forget about.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, besides the land, besides the cost of the construction, what other things are, impact your ability to build a more affordable home? Are there zoning and code regulations? And then, is it like one thing is a problem, or is it a bunch of things that's a problem?
Well, I think it's it's a combination of all of it, of what goes into the cost, and certainly the government regulation, I'll call it, which is everything from zoning and design and standards that they have. While there's a balance between what's good for the community. We don't want poorly designed neighborhoods and poorly designed housing, but at the same time, all of those regulations, all the time it takes you to get through that process. It can take years from the time a developer identifies a piece of land before they can even start building on it, and that time adds money to the cost of providing those houses, which then ultimately passes on down to the buyer. And I think a lot of it is when we're talking about home ownership, there's rental, affordable rental is also a very important topic, and there's certain income levels that really that's where you have to focus. But on home ownership, we can't always think about, well, you need 1,500 square feet and 3 bedrooms and a 2-car garage and a white picket fence. That may have been the American dream at some point in the past, but if we want to allow people to buy a home, which there's a lot of advantages to that, building equity, credit, just being part of the community, a lot of reasons for home ownership versus rental. Not that it's right for everybody, but the size of the home, doesn't always need to be that size home. If we can get, if we can be okay with, sometimes it might be a condominium as a starter, a 2-bedroom condominium, or a small townhome, or those sort of type of structures, which are more dense, more units per acre, less costly to build, and smaller units in and of themselves, less lumber, less carpet, less kitchen appliances, those sort of things, which all adds up to the
So in
bottom line.
that case, we're building up, not just out.
Yeah,
and
we
so
can build up and not out. Yep.
Gain some efficiencies there.
Right. And so all of that goes in. It's a very expensive process from beginning to end to try to build something, and the larger the structure you're building, or the less you get per acre of land, that just drives that cost way up.
Sure. Well, I always joke, I grew up in a 1,000 square foot, 3-bedroom ranch with a 1-car garage and unfinished basement. Nobody builds those anymore.
Right.
But it was perfectly fine for my family of 5, So I think that a lot of times We've, the McMansions that they talk about, the market has gone so big that it's very hard to build. It's expensive. It's
yeah.
a large property, it's a large piece of land, and it's just expensive from the get-go.
Yeah, you
So
have
maybe we
to-
need to rethink what that looks like, and that kind of takes me to maybe the next question for either one of you is, what are some of the maybe out-of-the-box kind of ways that we can develop more affordable homes besides the construction costs themselves?
Well, I think my emphasis in the coalition has really been on partnership, right? Because I think, there's the purely private model, and, I applaud developers, like Steve, who are trying to build those smaller homes and get more density, because I think that's really important. And that's going to serve a certain segment of the market. But then there are other ways in which, the government, the public sector, can incent the private sector or nonprofit developers to think differently, maybe about how they would handle a particular piece of land. I think a really interesting example of this is the riverfront crossings area,
Right.
in downtown Iowa City. So, as you may know, it runs. It's a big territory, right? It goes from Burlington down to Highway 6, and then from Gilbert over to Riverside. And because of past urban renewal, that area, which used to be, I guess, quite fairly densely populated, maybe 40, 50 years ago, emptied out quite a bit. And so the city had the opportunity to say, let's make some new rules for the redevelopment of this area. We know there's demand from the university, from folks working downtown, want to live downtown. Can we do that in a way that kind of shares the opportunities that that area brings? And to the city's credit, in the original plan, there wasn't a lot of discussion of affordable housing, but that changed. And I think with some pressure that we were able to bring and some learning that went on in the city manager's office and among the city councilors. So the city council just passed on a couple weeks ago a recommendation to write a law for that area saying there will be inclusionary housing, meaning that a relatively small percentage, 10 to 15% of the buildings, of the units in the large-scale apartment buildings that are going to be built there will be affordable. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so here you're not, demanding that the developer do this without providing something in return. The city will allow for greater density on those properties, and also will, I think, assist the developers with some other payments, but only if they're providing a public good, which is this greater number of affordable units. So and then nonprofit developers can also get involved in helping develop those affordable units or managing them, because some private developers don't want that responsibility over the years of figuring out, whose income is at what level. So they can basically contract that out to the nonprofits who have a lot of experience doing that. So it's a really nice partnership. The devil's in the details. The actual law is still to be written, but we have seen in, I think, about 500 communities around the country some version of inclusionary housing.
Yes. Yeah.
And in each case, there's the opportunity to tailor it to that community. So it's not a federal regulation from on high. It's a local regulation, and if it doesn't work perfectly, we can tweak it over time. So that's a promising model, and it is out of the box for this community and for Iowa in general. I think this would be the first time this would happen in Iowa.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that we're talking about a wide range of populations, it would seem to me also. I mean, you've got the, what I would say very low-income folks, but we're also talking about working class folks, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's people who have an average 9-to-5 job maybe in the service industry or some kind of health care or something like that, who don't make $100,000 a year, but still need more affordable housing than what maybe the market is available.
I mean, you think about a family making $40,000 a year. That doesn't go as far as it used to go.
Right.
Right? If they're, for math's sake, so they're making 36,000, a third of that, about 12,000. That's about $1,000 a month they can
For a house.
spend. And you're right, can you buy, pay for a mortgage on that? Maybe, maybe not. It's going to be tough. And if you've got a couple of kids especially. So we're talking about people really from, folks who are barely getting by to people who are working, 1, 2, 3 jobs, and they're struggling as well. So we really need to think about all of those groups of people.
Different
Because the
tiers
folks
and-
who are really struggling, a lot of them are working too, or they're trying to work, and it's really hard to get your life back on track if it's gotten off track, if you don't have a place to live, right? So there are efforts to try to provide some kind of, shelter so that those folks can get back on track and become, as productive as they want to be.
So let's maybe step back just a minute and ask, why do we care if these people have affordable housing, a roof over their head? What does the community at large need to be concerned about this?
Right. So obviously, if people think about it for themselves and their families, it's completely obvious, right, that it's very hard to have a happy, productive life if you don't have some safe, decent shelter. So it's easy for people to understand that for themselves,
Basic,
for their immediate friends and family. But if you think about a lot of, ordinary folks in our community who are doubling up, who are living in places that are not safe, are not healthy, and then you realize how that impacts their children's performance in school, their children's health, their performance on the job, their ability to be solid, productive people. We realize, well, this is a community issue. This isn't just about that family having trouble making it, or this family having trouble making it. This is something, as we think of education, right? It really matters to all of us that our children in general get a good education.
Sure.
I think what we're hoping is that people start to think about housing in that way, that it's going to affect the, health, education outcomes of and job outcomes of those people if they are poorly housed. So, and we can see the productivity increase. We can see the, people's just basic well-being improve if they have safe, decent housing. As you were saying, Mark, this doesn't mean, people getting giant homes to live in.
Right.
And nobody expects that. They're just hoping, and almost always they have to contribute some portion of their income.
Sure.
Nobody's just being,
I don't know of
handed a
anyone
pair
who's
of
been given
keys.
a free home lately.
Yeah, and I have to say, being a board member of Habitat for Humanity, I have to emphasize the point, the misconception is that people are given homes.
Right.
Habitat gives no one a home. Those folks are paying a mortgage every month and paying taxes and very much contributing to and I think improving their communities. What enables them to do that is that it's zero interest. So it's a lower mortgage maybe than many of us pay, but it is a mortgage, and it is something that they have worked for.
They're invested in it.
Right.
They're invested, they
in it.
invest their time and their money.
Well, you talk about the community and the effect on the community. Iowa City Manager Tom Marcus recently said at some meeting that I was at that if we as a community, as a society, think that affordable housing or housing is important for every member of our community, then we really need to treat housing as a public policy issue, which I thought was a pretty bold statement. And then he went on to say that if it is a public policy issue, we need to devote public resources to that, which gets back to your partnership idea and how and gets to your point of how do we make it easier to build more affordable houses.
Yeah.
And like we said, there's a certain point at which the affordability isn't going to make it for everybody. There's just some people that buying a home is not going to be
Right.
feasible, and that's where affordable rental housing comes into play.
Right.
Obviously.
Yeah, there's the concept of a housing ladder. right?
Okay.
That, maybe, a lot of us out of college, whatever, we rented, right? I mean,
Right.
sometimes for a long time until, we were able to move up that ladder. And it's not that it's the goal, everybody's goal to go to the top of the ladder. For some folks, that rental is exactly right for them, and that's where they're going to stay. There's a lot of flexibility in renting that you don't have with owning. Other people, for the reasons you mentioned, Steve, they want to really stay in this community, get rooted, build equity, and that can be incredibly important to, sending a kid to college, something
Right.
later in life. But what's happened now is our ladder is missing some of those rungs.
Oh.
It's hard to climb up or even find a place on the ladder
Sure.
for folks at the lower end of the income spectrum.
Yes,
So really
that
what we're
makes
trying
sense.
to do is just replace some of those rungs on the ladder. And to do that, it has to be a collective endeavor. It can't be something we ask only the government to do, only the developers to do, only the nonprofits. Nobody can do it.
Well,
by themselves.
that's a great segue into my next question for Steve, and that is, how do we strike this balance between what the private market can do or is able to do versus what government entities can or should do for their citizens? And builders obviously need to make a profit to stay in business. And we also know that communities need, and I think, benefit from, based on some of the things Sally has said, adequate supply of safe, affordable housing for all of its citizens. So bottom line, can private developers build affordable housing without some kind of assistance?
It depends on what the definition of affordable is. I mean, you're only going to be able, even a small 800 square foot house on a fairly small lot is going to have a certain price. That's not going to work for everybody. But if you can get zoning for that and get through the process and be able to build something like that, then there's a market for it. The community will, people will purchase it. Then yes, you could build something like that, and you can fill in, I think, some of those rungs that are missing. Not the very lower rungs, but some of those middle rungs. The $200,000 up house, which most, as you know, or most houses are in today. If we can try to get some homes between 100 and 200, that can be done on a cost basis, but it takes a collaboration. I mean, Sally said it takes everybody working together. You can't have an inclusionary policy that just says every new development has to sell so many houses for $50,000 or something like that, because then that's putting the burden of those houses on that development. It's a community issue, so we have to figure out how everybody in the community, whether there, tax abatements could be a big way. Certain areas where you abate property taxes for a certain length of time, or if you build homes of a certain size and you sell and the buyers are at or below 100% of the area median income, they get a tax abatement. Incentives like that. Again, it's working together to try to make it happen. It's all market driven. If there's a demand for it and it's available to do, I think the private sector will do it, but it takes collaboration. And I think that's what it's hard now to create those small lots and small houses, because there isn't, it's fighting an uphill battle when you try to create more density anywhere you go when you buy land. NIMBYism's a big deal, and just the attitudes of various stakeholders when you try to do that.
You mentioned NIMBYism, not in my backyard, which is a common problem with when we talk about affordable housing, is because, again, people go back to these stigmas and these ideas they have about what it is. And I know, so you mentioned Habitat for Humanity, and I know the Housing Fellowship has had a great program over the years of infill into existing neighborhoods. And you drive by those properties, and I would challenge anyone to tell which house on the block is the affordable house. It really is amazing to me what they are doing with those.
Oh, definitely. And I think being open to more of a mix of housing types. We've seen that in the Peninsula area, and I think we're seeing it in some of the other newer developments that you've been working on as well. The idea that the ideal, it's really a cultural notion that somehow, the ideal suburb is all houses of the same size. You look in a lot of older neighborhoods, even in Iowa City, certainly around the country, and you know, there was a much more of a mix. You might have a big house next to a smaller house, or in a city, you might have grand row homes and then smaller row homes. And kind of coming back to that cultural norm, because it really serves the community better. You know, we don't all make the same income, we don't all want the same thing, we want a variety of things. And just to pick up on Steve's point about this has to be a community effort, it has to, all the jurisdictions of this area need to value affordable housing.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing some progress on the Iowa City front. Certainly more can happen. And I think we want to see that same progress in Coralville, North Liberty, some of our smaller jurisdictions as well. Because that way, you know, we're really going to get that mix of neighborhoods, of housing types that I think will serve the community best.
And I think that mix, I mean, that's very important. And it's going to take some courage by elected officials in all jurisdictions to make that happen, because it is hard now. You do get flack when you try to get something like that done, but at the end of the day, when they're finished, most people would say, wow, that's pretty nice. It turned out nice.
I think that's true too. I think what they perceive at the beginning is oftentimes not the result.
Right.
And there isn't a problem at the end, but boy, getting there can be tough
It takes
sometimes.
courage up front to say, no, we're going to approve this project, even though some neighbors may say they don't want it.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I think to your point, Sally, we are, you know, we are a growing metro area. It isn't just Iowa City. It isn't just Coralville. You know, now you've got North Liberty, you've got Tiffany. They're all growing together, and obviously in every one of those communities, I would assume there are people in various income levels and various housing needs. So it certainly seems like it's not unique to just Iowa City.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah.
Well, I can certainly see how this is a very challenging issue for communities, for developers, for nonprofits to deal with. But you can also see how important it is to the community and to the fabric of a community to have affordable housing for all of our residents. Obviously, we don't have all the answers today, and that's not what we're here for. But I do hope that we've been able to drive the discussion forward a little bit. Do either of you have any other comments or thoughts you want to add before we close?
My only thought is that I think local employers should also be part of this mix. We've talked about the private sector, we've talked more about developers, but they're a huge part of our community, the University of Iowa, ACT, the factories on the south side of town. These are all really important anchors of our community, and I think to the extent that they begin, like the public officials, they begin to understand the importance of affordable housing, we'll see a lot more progress. If you go, back in time, employers used to actually provide housing for their employees.
They do now in some areas. So I mean, I have seen developments where an employer will do a whole development to provide affordable, decent housing for their employees.
Oh yeah, and there used to be whole towns like that. And we don't want to go back to the age of the mill town, but I think we do want to see employers recognize this as a public priority and provide some willingness to politically support it, maybe even financially support it.
Are you aware of, do we have any of that employer-assisted type of housing currently in town?
There's been, I don't think it's as active now, there's been a small program, University, where the University of Iowa, working with the city of Iowa City, to provide what we really call workforce housing. This is for some of their folks who make probably, far more than 60 or 80% of area median income, maybe up to 120, 140, but it's a way of stabilizing the north side neighborhoods. That was really the goal of that program, so that they wouldn't all flip over to rental. So some of them would maintain home ownership by responsible homeowners. But we could go way beyond that in terms of employers being involved in housing.
Well, I believe the university operates a very large van pool that goes out into all the surrounding communities to pick up the employees who work here but can't afford to live here, would be my impression is probably what's going on.
Right.
And and there's obviously a financial commitment to that.
Yeah, and they've built graduate student housing. Aspire on the west side of the river. So there are examples, and I think we'll have to see what direction the university heads in, but that would be something to consider.
Another alternative. Well, that's very good. Unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank my guest, Sally Scott, from the chair of the Johnson County Affordable Homes Coalition, and Steve Gordon with AM Management and the Saddlebrook Developments. I also want to thank the PATV staff and volunteers for their help in producing the show, and the members of the Johnson County Affordable Homes Coalition for all the work that they do. And you can go online and search for their website or their Facebook page if you want to get more information or get involved. I'm Mark Sines. Thanks again for watching, and have a great week.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.